Who sold you that load of Molyneux? Huh? Around here, I'm the dungeon keeper, and my rules are in black and white. Looks like your fable ends here.
I really hope that came out alright, because I do not want to have to do that again for the sake of the joke. If you found this via YouTube, by the way, then, hello, I guess. And, if you're one of my classmates, then welcome to my little corner of madness. I like dragons and video games. So for homework for one of my classes, I have been assigned a analysis to do of a television series, and since I don't watch much television, I decided to do the Rocket Jump web series VGHS instead. A little while into this video, I'm going to be getting into mild spoiler territory. I'm pretty sure that everybody who has an interest in this sort of thing has already seen the show, but just to be on the safe side, when we get to that point, I'll be bringing it up anyway. Before I get to the fun part, it's nice to know a little bit of backstory. Rocket Jump Studios' Video Game High School, also known as VGHS, is an action comedy web series. It was produced in 3 seasons, released between May of 2012 and December of 2014. A quick rundown of the plot is as follows, and I can't believe I just said those words out loud. In a not-so-fictitious future where competitive video games are the most popular sporting event on the planet, and by most popular sporting event on the planet, I mean that they...
And yet the president's condition is still unknown at this time. A nation waits with...
Anyway, the show's protagonist, Brian D., accidentally takes down the international superstar known as the Law on live broadcast television.
Close one.
Ha. This event earns him admission into the prestigious Video Game High School, which is exactly what it sounds like. After that, the show goes on to follow the adventures and misadventures of Brian and his friends by using most common high school drama elements, but set in a world where everything revolves around video games. Real quick, the main cast. Brian D. is your classic dorky teenager who accidentally makes it into VGHS by taking down the world-famous first-person shooter star known as the Law. Ted Wong is Brian's goofball friend and roommate, and one of the main sources of comic relief in the show. Jennifer Matthews, also known as Jenny Matrix, is the captain of the FPS team at VGHS, and also is kind of Brian's bombshell love interest slash girlfriend. It's really complicated. Kimberly Swan, although most people in the show call her Key for some reason, which I think is really weird, is another one of Brian and Ted's classmates, and she's also the daughter of the game designer of the in-universe fighting game known as Laceration Force. She herself is a game designer, so that makes her a little bit different from most of the other characters in the show. And she also happens to be Ted's love interest slash girlfriend, and that also happens to be really complicated. Lawrence Pemberton has the most wonderful name in the series, but he is a fallen from glory first-person shooter superstar, the show's nominal antagonist.
Too bad you're in my world now, Brian.
Ah! Jenny's ex.
I've got the girl of your dreams. Essin' my D.
Another source of comic relief.
Stylin' my dude.
And kind of at one point sort of one of Brian's teammates. Fun fact, the actor that played him was also kind of involved in the writing of the script for the show, so he does a little bit of everything. I wonder if it's safe to move my teleprompter a little bit closer to the actual camera. It's safe to use this as a teleprompter, right? If you hear a big crash, you know what happened. It's also probably worth mentioning that VGHS itself is a boarding school, and since most of the show takes place outside of class, whatever a class might consist of in the first place.
Hello, students, and welcome to FPS 101. My name is Ace. You can call me Ace. Sound good? Fantastic.
I have to assume that's mostly a mechanism to allow for the plot advancement to happen during the off hours and stuff, the same way it did in Harry Potter. Moving on. Show's executive producer perspective. VGHS was created by Rocket Jump Studios and directed by Fred Wong, Matthew Arnold, and Brian Latch. And if you've been around the internet in the last 15 years, you've probably heard at least some of those names at some point or another. On the About page to Rocket Jump's website, they summarize their philosophy very directly. The rocket jump, they say, is a video game reference. It's when you simultaneously jump and shoot a rocket at your feet. The resulting explosion propels you to insane heights from which you can unleash a frenzy of destruction. Nerdy, we know. But we think it actually captures the spirit of what we do. Bear with us for a second. Think about it. Someone, at some point, thought that the rocket jump maneuver was 1, something that might work, 2, something that they should try, and 3, something that would not kill them instantly. That's debatable. It shouldn't work, and yet it does. And a little farther down the page. In 2010, we quit our jobs to make movies the way that we remembered, the way that got us dreaming about becoming filmmakers in the first place. And that's essentially the organization's entire creed in a few short paragraphs. Freddie Wong and Brian Latch in particular gained a fair amount of notoriety on YouTube in the late 2000s, early 2010s. They co-founded the channel that would later become Rocket Jump under the very creative name of Freddie W. I wonder where they got that from. Of the three, Freddie's name is the most widely known, probably due to the explosive popularity of the YouTube channel with his name on it. In 2007, he won first place in Guitar Hero 2 at the World Series of Video Games, and shortly after he became an early adopter of YouTube as a place to post video game/comedy related videos. As for why VGHS was chosen to be a web series instead of, for example, something that would air on television, on their Kickstarter page, which I'll talk more about in a minute, Freddie explains that, "We strongly believe that the foundations for the future of digitally distributed content will be laid down by web series. We don't see a web series as a stepping stone to get a feature film project or a TV deal. A good web series is an end unto itself. The web series format is uncharted territory, and we want to explore it." He also talks a bit about that on the video pitch on their Kickstarter page, and as somebody who spends way too much time on the internet, this is an idea I can definitely get behind.
And one of the reasons why we're so excited about the web series as a format is a lot of people look at web series as stepping stones. They look at it as like, okay, I'm going to do a web series, I'm going to use that in order to land a feature film. Or I'm
It's
going to
like
use
junior
that.
varsity TV.
Right, exactly. And it's like, you can't make something that's good in the format if you don't take the format seriously.
Speaking of the Kickstarter, instead of more traditional funding, the money needed to produce VGHS was raised almost entirely through crowdfunding. Obviously, you can't go and pledge anymore because the final season was finished over half a decade ago now, but if you want to see a little bit more about the production of the show itself, you can still visit the page, it's still up and you can go and poke around a little. And also, if you're really interested, after Season 3 was finished, Freddie actually published a breakdown of how the money was used, which you might be interested in if you're into knowing how video content is created. Production perspective. Now we get to talk about the show itself. Things like costume design and props are pretty much what you'd expect. Brian and Ted and some of the other minor nerdy characters are for the most part presented like dorks, while on the flip side, Ernie Calhoun, who is one of the school administrators, is almost always dressed up real nice, except for that one time when...
What the? Get back here and clean this up!
There was one little bit of production that stood out to me more than everything else, though. One of the plot threads in Season 2 involves a character dubbed the Drift King, who, as his name might suggest, is in charge of the racing game corner of the school. Notice anything interesting about the way his classroom looks and the way that he interacts with the other drifters in the show?
How about 48 miles per hour?
Bravo, Clutch. 300 yards. Yeah. You have passed the Soda Star.
Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that until I decided to read the YouTube comments. Thank you, open bracket phase, close bracket, XX_Sonic420_X for 1, having the most VGHS-y usernames possible, but 2, for paying more attention in my communications class than I did. There is actually one more slightly subtle bit of costuming that you might notice. If you look closely at Law's uniform when he's playing in-game, you might notice that he's wearing an Ace of Spade on his uniform. Can you even see that? It's an Ace of Spade. This is something that I assumed was just part of his, like, clan uniform iconography or something, until I scrolled down and learned something new from another YouTube comment. And I almost wish that I was doing a written essay on this now, because now I would have to go and find out how you cite a YouTube comment in MLA format. Throughout the show as a whole, there are a couple instances where multiple plot threads would be going on at the same time, and they'd either tie back together, or they'd just be mirrors of each other, but since I don't want to give myself extra editing, throughout the show as a whole, there are a couple instances where there would be multiple plot threads going on at the same time, and they would either tie back to each other later, or they would just exist as mirrors to each other. But in case you feel like watching VGHS yourself, or since you're still here after I did the spoiler warning, rewatching the whole show from the beginning, you might enjoy looking out for those. It happens a few times. Since most of my classmates are covering situational comedy for this assignment, I guess I'll talk about the laugh track. VGHS does not have a laugh track. Except for one very specific instance in Season 3, Episode 4.
How's it going?
Great, how are you?
Also great.
Also great. What a coincidence.
I know, small world.
Yeesh, these two. Frosty.
Okay, what's with the laughing robot?
Oh, you guys hear that too?
Of course we hear it. It's really distracting.
Her name is Audie, and she's not distracting. She's charming.
Okay, that is weird, Key.
Actually, yeah, are you okay? Is this like a cry for help?
You're a cry for help.
There's a little twist on it that I don't know if you would have picked up on or not. It's a benign violation at the expense of the mechanisms of the situational comedy itself. Good job, Rocket Jump. I cannot believe this thing hasn't fallen off my head yet. Ideological perspective. Wait a minute. There's one more thing about production that I almost missed. So here's the thing that Key made as a part of a game that she was working on.
Whoa! And since mathematically it's the only shape to always correct itself, I thought the Gombak would make a nice mini-boss. I don't know though, maybe it's stupid.
What? No! It's awesome! You could call it the Gomboss.
Ted's like your Gomboss that you've been working on. I mean, sure, sometimes he gets knocked around, but you gotta trust him to pick himself back up.
I know you're just trying to protect me, and I'm sorry that you're stuck doing rhythm gaming with my dad. Oh. Okay, I deserve that. Please forgive me.
Notice any parallels in there? Back to business. The ideological perspective. For the most part, in this part of the analysis, I'm going to be talking about a single episode, although I'm probably still going to be jumping around a little bit to reference this or that. This is where it gets spoilery, so if you want to watch the whole series first, there's links where you can do that in the video description or up there. Actually, the video is going to be mirrored, so it would be up there, wouldn't it? Season 2, Episode 3, known as Double XP Weekend. So VGHS is officially an action comedy instead of a situational comedy. And among other things, this means that there is an overarching plot thread throughout each of the seasons and the show as a whole. And each of the episodes, for the most part, aren't self-contained units. And to make things even more confusing, a number of episodes, like I said earlier, have 2 or 3 sometimes plot threads going on at the same time in parallel. So I think some backstory is in order. Season 1, Brian accidentally defeats Law in the first-person shooter video game known as Field of Fire. Brian gets admitted into VGHS. Brian makes some enemies. Brian makes some friends. Brian gets kicked around by the Law. Brian defeats Law again. Brian makes out with Jenny.
That was your first kiss, wasn't it?
And my last, because now I'm gonna go die from
No,
embarrassment.
Brian, it was fine.
Season 2, Ted doesn't do his homework. Brian is now on the FPS team. Brian gets hazed by being tied to a flagpole. Law is now Brian and Ted's roommate, because that sounds like a good idea.
Mary Matrix made you and me roommates. Isn't that awesome? Put all of my stuff everywhere.
Brian and Ted play Mario Kart. Hilarity ensures. Now we're all caught up. Double XP Weekend. As mentioned with the executive producer bit, the main agenda that the creators were trying to get across with VGHS is the legitimization of the internet as a platform for content creation, rather than any kind of great push for social change. But we can probably still derive some values and beliefs from the characters and acting and the contents of the episode. This particular episode is all about parental relationships, set up by the fact that it is Parents Weekend at VGHS. And as it happens, none of the core 4 main characters, Brian, Jenny, Kimberly, and Ted, have exactly what you'd call a normal relationship with their parents. So Brian lost his dad when he was 3, and his mom is some kind of MMO addict. And unfortunately, the Parents Weekend that the episode is centered around coincides with the titular Double XP Weekend. So you know where she is going to be, and it's not going to be visiting Brian. Ted has what we'll call an interesting relationship with his dad.
Did you just give your dad $5,000?
I owe him child support. No big, just smart and responsible Ted paying his dad $5 large.
No. Ted, he pays you child support.
No, Brian. Don't mean to make you sound super dumb, but that would be called father support.
Alright then.
You've been this lady for, what, a week? I've been this father twice a month on weekends for his entire life. Ted stays where he belongs, you hear me? In my shadow!
Well, we know how that's going to go. Jenny's mom is winning some kind of Mother of the Year award, despite clearly not being anybody's idea of Mother of the Year.
You were never there for me. And Dad, the one who always got in the way, he was always there for me. He did everything with me that a mother should do with a daughter. He taught me how to fix my hair. He showed me how to talk to boys. He did everything that you wouldn't do because you weren't around.
She asks, persuades, coerces, okay, forces Jenny to write a speech about her to be delivered at the event that she's being given the award at. And did anybody notice that the VGHS document writing application is basically Microsoft Word 1997? Key's parents, particularly Ken Swan, run the family like a business.
I request a performance review.
This isn't up for discussion.
Article 44A, Section G of the Swan family contract states, if Key feels her parents are being mean and unreasonable, she can request an official review of her performance.
And her dad thinks she's underperforming as a designer at VGHS.
I'm learning so much, I'm becoming a better designer.
No, you're not. Your new game sucks.
And she should just go home instead. So in a nutshell, this episode is about...
You can't just waltz back into my life.
Yes, I
and tell me-
can. I'm your mother.
Since when?
And...
Is someone having imaginary friends again?
I am not.
Or, broadly speaking, teenage relationships with parents who are possibly a little bit crazy and also possibly your coach on the varsity FPS team. Being a teenager is hard, right? But despite it all gets resolved with Jenny.
So, when I started playing, I took your handle. Matrix. Jenny Matrix. Because you weren't just my mom. You were my hero.
And with Key.
This isn't about VGHS. This is about me growing up without you. I love you.
I love you too, Kiwi.
And kind of with Brian, and we actually get to see it resolved at the beginning of the next episode, 30-foot range.
Brian, what's the hurry?
Meet my mom at the bus stop.
Except it turns out that it isn't.
Cheeto?
The specific ideologies shown off here aren't really all that nice and neat and clean.
Dude, your mom's a cat.
Your mom's cat.
And in fact, I would go as far as to say that a lot of the characters in the show have to actually work for the solutions to their problems. But here are a couple things that you might pick up on. 1. Parents of teenagers aren't always wrong, except when they are.
I don't really feel like talking about you in front of everybody.
Well, it sucks to be you. See you at 10.
2. Teenage kids aren't always wrong, except when they are.
Ovulations, old bean.
I won't count Ted here because, as usual, he's mostly played off for comic relief. But this is most obvious with the Swans, where Key tries a few different tactics to persuade Ken to let her stay at VGHS, and in the end he politely admits defeat. I guess we'll call it that. And that was actually pretty nice of him, although at the same time, who the crap gives your kid a performance review? I guess I should also mention the relationship between Ted and Freddy, but that's kind of a running joke throughout the whole series until Freddy gets, let's say, written out in Season 3. I mainly keep just talking about it because it's funny, to be honest. As for how this is all communicated, other than the written lines of dialogue themselves, I think that's kind of self-evident.
Honey, why delay the inevitable? I always win.
But if I win, I stay at VGHS. If you win, which you won't, I'll do the dishes on Wednesday nights.
Lasagna night. You are desperate. Very well.
Outside of the main thing with the parents, if you look closely at the show as a whole, you can find some little bits that look like they could specifically be poking fun at one thing or another. But VGHS is already a satire of everything under the sun, so I don't know if it's worth my time to read too far into most of those. The cultural perspective. In this communications class, we talked about ranking the characters in the show based on the amount of power they have over, like, everything. And in this episode, it's a little hard to do that because there are more than one threads going on at the same time, so I'll just break it up into 2 parts. In the Swan half, at the top of the ladder, I put Key because she ultimately wins the battle, or at least she didn't lose it, and I don't want to say she got what she wanted because that's kind of, like, cold, but she accomplished her goal. Underneath that, I would put Mr. Swan, Ken Swan, because he eventually does get the point that Key is old enough to make her own decisions and stay at school. But at the same time, he's, like, calm about it, and dare I say professional, because that's, like, all he does. And Ted is involved, and he is at the bottom because...
I'll just have some water, thanks.
Ah, a water man. Fine taste. I admire a dad with a sophisticated phallus.
Hey, did you ever wonder how many times they probably had to shoot that one before he was able to deliver the line with a straight face? Because you don't want to know how many times I had to shoot this one before I was able to do it with a straight face. Anyway, on the Matrix side of things, on top I would put Mary Matrix, Coach Matrix, Mom, whatever you want to call her. This actually gets flipped upside down a little bit in a later episode, but for the time being, she's the one calling the shots. She's the one in charge. She's the one bossing Jenny around. After that, I would put Jenny herself because she and her mom, well, relationships are a two-way street.
Well, it sucks to be you.
Or so I've been told. And at the bottom, Brian, the main character, unfortunately, he's a nice kid, but he has about as much of a say in his fate here as every other high school freshman does, or thinks they do. Continuing with the theme of the power rankings, most shows might give one group of people most or all of the power, or make the entire show some kind of power struggle. But in VGHS, you don't really see very much of a distinction between people on the basis of the color of their skin or their religion or anything. Of course, since this is a high school drama, especially in season 1.
Oh, and I can forget about playing in that scrimmage because Jenny probably thinks I'm the biggest dork in the universe.
So Jenny's here.
What up, Matrix? What brings you our neck of the cafeteria woods?
Well, I was gonna invite you to my party because that was one of the sickest pit runs I've ever seen. But, I'm sorry, could you just...
Oh, sunglasses indoors. Must look like a douchebag, what was I thinking?
There is a definite distinction between the cool kids and the not cool kids, and you can probably guess which group Brian and his friends fall into. Back to the main point. As you can see in this episode, both the kids and the parents both do and don't have control over everything, which I would think is the main point it's trying to make. Or, since it's a high school drama / comedy, the point that already exists in the world that it's just kind of poking fun at. To wrap things up, if you want to see how the Matrix thing ends up getting resolved later on, here's a little bit from the end of Season 2, Episode 6.
I see you at practice, Coach? Screw that, I'll see you both at dinner. Tonight. And Brian, do something about that hair.
Before I finish everything, I do kind of want to talk a little bit about the production and distribution of VGHS a little bit more. Since this is an internet show instead of one that ran on traditional broadcast television or whatever, VGHS has a somewhat different relationship with distribution services than classic television shows do. I mentioned that it was funded primarily through Kickstarter, where the first season not only met its pledge goal of $75,000 within a single day, but it was able to rack up over $270,000 before the 30-day pledge period came to a close. So among all the horror stories about crowdfunding failures that you may or may not hear about, this show is definitely not one of them. Presently, the show is available for money on YouTube Red or YouTube Premium or whatever it's called these days. It's on iTunes, it's on Amazon Prime and Google Play, as well as it's free with ads on the Freddy W / Rocket Jump YouTube channel. Although, as many of us probably know, YouTube ads aren't worth a whole lot these days. Later on, VGHS became available for streaming on Netflix, and as far as I know, it's still there. And at least for a time, it was actually at least the first 2 seasons, and I would assume the third were distributed on physical DVDs as well. Finally, puns and other humor, or as we in video games like to call them, Easter eggs. This isn't even all of them, this is just some of the ones that made me scream the loudest. Season 1, Episode 7, they made an entire elaborate goofy fight scene just to set up the scene with the flagpole. I wonder what game that's a reference to.
I wouldn't want to be you when Law finds out. Because he's going to be like, what?
Jesus Christ, I put the goddamn Colossus Roar in VGHS and I didn't even notice until the second time I watched it. For those of you unaware, the Colossus Roar is basically the battle cry, maiden call, whatever, of the Music and Games Festival, which Freddie Wong has been known to attend from time to time. They're actually trying to, like, phase it out because people, it turns out, find it really annoying, but still!
It feels so empowering to start one of those.
VGHS FPS Clan Tryouts live here at our mobile news studio at Grand Theft Auditorium.
Oh, for God's sake, guys.
I must say, your Professor Layton...
Yes, they really said that.
...has no understanding of where the puzzle genre fits into Cal Wa's 4 categories of play.
And that is actually a real thing.
Who sold you that load of Molyneux?
Okay, that one was a little...
Huh? Round here, I'm the dungeon keeper.
Guys.
And my rules are in black and white.
Who even wrote this script?
Looks like your fable ends here.
Okay, Key. So when I meet your dad, is it Hello, Mr. Swan, or should I say, see out, less than, open quote. Hello, Mr. Swan, close quotes, return 0, semicolon.
Dad, you learned C++, kind of.
Unfortunately, he missed a semicolon at the end of the first line, so the whole thing wouldn't compile, but it's the thought that counts, right? Also, has anybody ever noticed how weird it is to pronounce C++ code out loud? If you've ever played a video game, you probably know what that pose is.
Ted? How long has it been? 24 hours?
You haven't aged a day!
I'm forcing myself to only include a couple instances of trope mockery in this list, but Season 1, Episode 8 had a couple good ones.
So, Key, it's been a while.
It's been one day, Brian.
Okay.
I'm technically supposed to do a fifth perspective here, but I touched on most of the points for worldview in other places in this video. And it's running a little long now, so I guess I'll just forfeit a letter grade here or something.
And that concludes our meeting.
What did I even learn from this anyway? 1. The internet is a valid place to create video content, even if the best way to grow an audience is kind of to already have an audience. 2. Being a teenager is hard. 3. A good comedy show can have multiple layers of meaning underneath the jokes and humor that you might not even notice unless you look really carefully. 4. You can learn things from reading YouTube comments sometimes. 5. Don't shoot videos like this over multiple days because you might have a hard time getting the lighting and set and everything to not look completely disparate. 6. I really should have just written a normal essay for this because my god, this thing took like 30 hours to put together and I wish that was an exaggeration. Alright, that's it. I think, anyway. Hopefully you all got something out of that. I probably won't be making any more videos like this unless I completely failed this assignment and have to redo the class in the fall. My name is DragoniteSpam. I named my channel after electronic junk mail for some reason. I like to play video games, funnily enough, so if you're interested in those as well, you might want to go and poke through it or something. Or not. We'll see how that goes. I will see you all later.